This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, ideas, and interviews from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. I'm back for another season. Our topic today, we're kicking off the year with a controversial one. Not really, but look, something I promised when I started this podcast was to tackle the conversations, the challenges, those off-the-record kind of issues that media salespeople face. And I'm going to tackle it head on, and we're going to talk about it candidly and openly. Media salespeople all around the world are connecting with me on LinkedIn at the moment. I'm absolutely loving people hitting me up in the DMs. I'm posting a hell of a lot more. I'm loving when people interact with the comments. I want to get debate going. And this topic's one that's kind of unanimous across the board from everyone I speak to. In the past 2 years, right, and this is 2022 I'm in right now, in the past 2 years, we've been doing everything in our power to super serve our clients. Every dollar of revenue into the business has been sacrosanct. And we're in a market with a lot shorter planning and buying cycles. We've probably been more accommodating than ever before. And a lot of this is actually really good, okay? It actually has really exposed where some of the efficiency issues were, where some of the process issues were. It's really made everybody step up to another level. But what do you do when you got a client who is consistently behaving or operating in a way that maybe isn't respectful, maybe isn't appropriate, or probably more commonly is just against their own best interests? Some examples might be,
these guys always act so adversarial when it comes to negotiating. They dictate unreasonable terms and timelines and tell us if we want the money, then we need to abide by their rules. End of conversation.
I'm having issues with this marketing manager who's just making these comments that are super inappropriate. I just feel like he needs to remember that this is a professional relationship.
They're nice people, but they don't realise how much their sloppy approach to briefing and booking is negatively impacting their campaigns.
So our guest today is a friend of mine. He's a big fan of the pod, Nisar Malik. Now, he's the sales director of Effect at ViacomCBS, Australia and New Zealand. Now, probably you know that name because it's a massive global media empire, but in Australia they were the recent acquirers of Channel 10, and they have a very diverse offering. Nisar and I have worked together previously in different roles, and he's got a real particular skill set in this area, like very much that kind of EQ-based leadership. So really keen to get him on and unpack this one for you guys. As a final note, and it is a plug, look in the show notes and hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm really starting to take LinkedIn more seriously this year, and I'm trying to, wherever possible, post tips and tricks and content and rehash some of the things that we talk about in this podcast in a sort of more digestible format that might be helpful to people who just need those quick tactics to give them a bit of an edge. So hit me up on LinkedIn. Please add me. Tell people about the podcast. I do this for you. And I'm happy to get back for another year. I'm excited. It's going to be a really, really interesting year. I've already got a couple of really cool guests in the can, so let's get into it.
The first five.
Nisar, welcome.
Hi, mate. How are you?
Good, mate. We're just talking about, it's been a while between drinks and catch-ups, my friend, with travel off the cards.
Travel off the cards, a bit of movement, market movements and things like that. But yeah, mate, it's, I think, a good 2 years or so.
It's a weird time because it doesn't feel like 2 years, but I mean, you and I had a bit of a brief crossover where we were running sort of separate markets but working as part of the sales team, or the national sales team. But you know, for the audience, tell us a bit about yourself, your media background, and particularly keen to hear about your current role.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, mate. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Quickly to cover off myself, I am currently the sales director at Effect ViacomCBS at Channel 10. Effect is a premium integrated marketing solutions team. It's a full-service, purpose-built business to help marketers innovate their brands and their brand partnerships across our portfolio of brands, which they're quite vast over the last couple of years where we've had mergers and acquisitions go through globally. So it's everything from our traditional Channel 10 network platforms that you'd know, as well as our BVOD service, 10 Play, and our streaming service, Paramount Plus. right through our global brands that we have, MTV, Nickelodeon and all its extensions, Comedy Central, BET, and all the related digital and live event properties that come along with it. So there's a lot happening there at the network. I've been in this industry for 20 odd years. Prior to that, as you mentioned, we worked together at ARN. I was at Channel 9 and at SEA in various sales management roles. But wonderful industry for 20 years, mate, and you get to meet a lot of beautiful people like yourself.
Oh, thank you, sir. You're too kind. Right back at you. But, I actually did think of you as the first person when I had the audience, kind of reaching out saying we should tackle this topic. And this whole idea of addressing poor client behaviour, it's probably one, I'll be honest, I felt a little trepidatious about, only because I didn't want the audience to misinterpret what we're saying here. But let's think about this and unpack this. This whole thing of poor client behaviour. Why do you reckon this topic is actually a little bit taboo to even discuss, for people like yourself and myself who've been in the industry as long as we have?
Yeah, fear is such a strong word, but I think it is a right word that you use. I think it's because it's such a no-no, because I think to answer it correctly, people feel that they will offend or be ostracized if they're picking up specific examples, We all know it exists. We all know it's not cool. But I also think it's the way you look at it. And I think if you try to spin it the other way, which is, as managers and leaders and of teams, we want to ensure that we're supporting everybody, right? But sometimes it gets lost in the fold because we want to make that number, we want to make that budget, and it's easier to ignore and just move on. But what I've sort of found through the years is, deep down inside, it does affect people. People can stew on it or get even worse if they've taken that feedback personally or that behavior personally. And I've always said, the behavior you walk past is the behavior you accept. So it's really important to actually acknowledge it and find a solution. It's not just about pointing fingers. It's something is driving or motivating that behavior from that individual or the client or whoever it may be, or a group of people. And as part of being a manager and a leader, it's really important to provide that safe space of communication for our staff. So yes, I agree with you. It is a little bit taboo and it's a little bit, I don't want to touch that, but I think it's an important one to tackle.
Mate, I think, can you say that quote again around the standard you walk past?
So the behavior you walk past is the behavior you accept. Right? And if you think about it logically, if you allow someone to speak to you, treat you, whatever it may be, in such a manner and don't address it, and this is a pretty strong sort of, example, but if you don't address it, that individual believes that that's how they can deal with you.
That's the piece for me that's really interesting. And I think when we were sort of putting this one together, we even sort of agreed that it's also the time, right? It's the fact that if you actually set that precedent and then it becomes something that's been ongoing for 6 to 7 months, that discontent, that seed of discontent has there been festering for 6 months. So really kind of leaning into these tough convos early, taking sort of early intervention kind of steps and really making sure that you've got the skills and the EQ and the confidence to tackle those. That's what we're going to get into today.
Media Sales Mastery.
Poor client behaviour, right? It's a broad catch-all term. It's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's very subjective. Let's talk about the teams you've led in the past. What are sort of maybe some of the most common examples of what we would deem as universally poor client behaviour that your average person would actually accept as being poor client behaviour?
Look, I will preface this as we go through. We are living in an interesting time, right? Like there's a lot of pressures and there's a lot of people under pressure to deliver. So sometimes tonality, and especially through COVID, where there's a lot of emails and a lot of written communication, context can be taken out. So it's very important to decipher what is actually trying to be said and what you're taking maybe incorrectly as well, right? But in terms of your question, I'd say there's no different to what your listeners would have experienced. A lot of it revolves around primarily poor communication, right? And then from that point, it turns into a cycle or just a comedy of errors. And it comes in many forms because you may receive a poor brief, or a lack of information to begin with. And then salespeople not feeling empowered or comfortable to ask more questions to dissect the brief further. And then from that point, it moves into an incorrect response because you haven't really asked the questions or don't have the information to begin with. And then we're looking at lost business. And from that point starts the finger pointing. right? And then it's a he said, she said, I didn't get this, well, you didn't ask that. And then as managers, we say, why didn't you ask for more information? So there's a lot of that stems from a poor brief to begin with, or then us not actually asking the questions that we need. Abrupt emails, that's a big one. Especially in this day and age and what's happened more recently in the last couple of years, communication in writing taken out of context. We tend to take things personally when in actual fact it probably was a cut and paste note that went to all media, potentially. And, we may say, we start to take that note personally that it's targeted at us, right? So that sets our mindset on alert, and then we're focusing on the wrong things and not actually what the task at hand is, but what this person and how they've spoken to me. Aggressive tone when they deliver their messaging. And that could be, again, as we spoke about earlier, is about their pressures. And we may not have understood their pressures and we've answered things incorrectly. Again, it's a cycle thing that happens where one error leads to another, One of the big ones that I've seen, which, I've done before in time as well, is not listening correctly when someone's briefing you, and then asking questions on the information the client's already provided. That gets the client's headspace in a different spot, right? But I go by this, and generally people aren't just rude for no reason. Like, they're not, right? There are pressures that are at hand. There are things that we just sort of discussed that may have triggered something, but something has brought that relationship to a point, for good or for bad. And it can go the other way, right? So it can harm your communication. It can harm the further information that you receive as well, because there's a barricade now that's been built up. And more commonly than not, it always revolves or starts off with a brief or some sort of email or task that's been given. And that's been the most common examples of, I would say, poor behaviour.
I think that's a great kind of call out there too, because and I'll show how nerdy I am. I'm reading a book at the moment, which is actually about high output management. And they talk about a whole bunch of different industries, and they're talking about manufacturing. When you think about it, right, it's a scalable, efficient, repeatable process to get something from A to B, from raw material to a fully built out product, or in our case, a brief to pitch, right? Getting that solution to the client. And they talk a lot in manufacturing about materials quality checking, where the risk is at its lowest and the cost of time and money is at its lowest. So don't find the materials are faulty once you've assembled the car. Find the materials are faulty before they've actually been dispatched to the factory. And that to me seems like actually a really interesting parallel you're drawing there, of going, there's always that initial starting point where something potentially has the potential to veer off. And if left unchecked, it might seem relatively small in terms of, a little bit off base. Maybe we're going to just not clarify that one detail right now because for whatever reason, we're time poor. Maybe they were a bit curt on the phone. We're not going to clarify or address that one thing. Left unchecked for 3 or 4 weeks, that becomes a bigger issue, inadvertently, of its own accord.
Mate, Jamie, 100%. And I've always stated that, I, even as growing up through being a coordinator to a sales rep to a GC, I was never paid to do a prop. I was always paid to manage a relationship. I was always paid to ensure that our business was protected, our staff was protected, and we delivered our service. We delivered what we said we'd do, right? The prop, to be honest with you, a lot of people can do a prop. It's not about a prop. It's about body language. It's emotional intelligence. It's reading that they're not happy with your response. Call it out. Sorry, I just saw you flinch at this part here. What is it? Is there something there that's caught your eye? It is so important. And I understand that takes a bit of bravery. It takes a bit of guts. I get that. But it saves you so much time in the long run. Right? You do not want to leave 100%. A boardroom where someone talks behind you about, oh my God, I can't believe I just saw that. That was rubbish. But you don't want that. If you can see someone flinching or moving, or giving you that little bit of some people got bigger tails than others. And if they've got that tail, stop that slide. Just stop, right? And point to that person or call that person and say, hey, listen, I just saw that you sort of, you sat uneasy in your chair. What is it there that you didn't like? Because you just don't know what they're going to say. You might have missed something in the brief. There's so many things that could unravel from that point. You don't want to leave the room going, oh, slide 16, I don't know what happened there. Why do that to yourself?
I think it's easy sometimes to diagnose issues as just purely interpersonal problems. I don't like that person. We don't gel. We don't vibe. There's an incongruence in the way that this relationship is working. And I guess maybe in your experience, what would you say, like how much of this interpersonal conflict actually stems from just a lack of shared objectives or a lack of clear communication? Like, are there genuinely cases where, personality types just don't work, like in a social setting? Personality types just don't gel and that's the way it is? Or
yeah, you'll find more often than not the type of personality, the attributes that an individual has to be in this industry can cause conflict with a lot of other people, because that's just there's a lot of alphas. There's a lot of people within this industry that want to be heard, want to be sound, and their way's right and whatnot. So you're going to find yourself bumping heads at times. Absolutely. You wouldn't have lived if you haven't had some sort of conflict with someone, right? That's just what it happens. But that's not the job. The job is to find a way around it. And to find a way around it doesn't mean that you have to beg and bow and look the other way and accept things. It is trying to understand their needs and wants, and the most important, and I said this before, but probably delve into it a little bit more, their pressures, right? And clients' pressures as their budgets shrink, but still need to have the same output and outcome, and agencies that get put under pressure that might be understaffed, under-resourced, whatever it may be, but to still have the same outcome required puts people under pressure. You have your own pressures in delivery of budgets and whatever it may be, right? So it is okay to pause the conversation at any point in time. Your question about, how do you diagnose or spot it? I mean, it's very easy to spot a problem. It's body language, it's tone, it's everything. I don't think people need to know that. I'm sure anyone can tell straight away this is not going 100% right, or this is not going the outcome in the way we want it. So at that point in time, it's very important to literally pause, right? And understand where you're at, try to understand where they're at. So what is your pressure? Pause the conversation, have a sidebar. What is the issue here? Why am I feeling a bit of abruptness in your communication? Like I'm trying to come to an outcome here. I want to ensure that you're happy. I want to ensure that you're satisfied with what we're about to deliver, but I feel like you're not on that page. I mean, that is a tough conversation to have, don't get me wrong, but I'm telling you, you have those conversations. People appreciate it because people are time poor, as are you, and you want to be able to come to the right solution and move forward, right? And right now, everyone knows that there's a lot of pressures around currently in the environment that we're in. Depending on what medium you're in as well, you've got your own pressures that COVID has brought. So understanding someone's outcome is fantastic, but also understand how they plan to navigate their way there and where do you fit in. Because already, if you're briefed, you know that your medium is part of the channel mix. So you're already wanted, you're already there. So you need to find out how your company is the one that's going to win that pitch. And the one that's going to do that is the one that's going to connect the best and deliver exactly what they want.
Something you said there that I want to pull out, it's difficult to have those convos around what's off here. I'm sensing something in your body language. I'm sensing something in your tonality, in your communication. Yep. Just the broad, hey, I just get a sense there's some frustrations here. Can we explore that?
Oh, absolutely.
How much harder is that getting when you don't have, I mean, we covered this with Dave Roddick when he was on, and the world of primarily relying now on tech to communicate and to pitch. I mean, how much of that kind of, that reading the room and that body language have we had to really probably do without over the last couple of years, for want of a better term?
I'm obviously, the way we're talking at the moment is a non-COVID world because you're going to be in person, right? But utilising video, utilising emails as we currently do. I mean, I'll call that right now. I mean, doing a presentation over video where potentially there's 50 people in the room and you can only see 3 boxes to the right is hard because we are storytellers. Everyone that is in sales, that is presenting something, is telling a story. And you want to see that passion fall into people's eyes. You want to see people fall in love with what you're doing, understand, nod and smile along the way. But when you've got people on mute and cameras not on, and it's so hard and you feel like you're talking to yourself, right? So I get that. You're not going to get that feedback from that, but
that if you're presenting to a large group of people via video, there's always going to be a couple of friendlies in the room, right? You want to call them afterwards. You want to work out how did that go down and where did that fell? Did I answer the brief? Whatever. You're always going to ask for feedback. From a call it an email point of view, if you're sensing tonality come through, and again, tonality is quite subjective when you look through emails, and sometimes people read into things that aren't there. But if you do feel that, that's what you feel. Pick up the phone. You just pick up the phone. You do not reply back in an email. If someone has sent you a whole 1 page of complaints, you do not respond in email. You pick up the phone, right? You pick up the phone and I just got your note. I am just reading through it. I'll get back to you. You need to acknowledge that verbally. Even now you can do that via Teams and via video. I'll be back to you within a day and respond with all the, with this solved or whatever the situation is. But don't go back with another email.
It's a great insight, mate, and I think it just can't be understated. Like, pick up the phone. Like, nobody that I've ever encountered is scarier on the phone than they are on the damn email, right? Like, the keyboard it's a very treacherous place. Exactly. And
mate, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this. 9 times out of 10, even if that note was harsh or you read the tone correctly, the person on the phone is nowhere near that.
Correct. And I wanted to kind of dive into this, this poor client behaviour piece really specifically. Do you have an example of like a particular time throughout the career, and obviously, we'll be pretty vague here, but where you've got a maybe there's a little bit of PTSD still hanging out there. Maybe walk us through, like, was there a time or an issue where you had bad client behaviour? Walk us through, the first signs, in hindsight, the first kind of sign of it becoming an issue, how it was diagnosed, how it was approached and resolved.
Mate, I've been in the industry for a while, so I've experienced media, let's just say the golden age of media for my era, 20, 25 years ago, where I've had experiences where I've had a pen thrown at me, I've been thrown out of boardrooms, banned from agencies for a week. Like a lot of that stuff that just does not exist in this day and age, right? So I've experienced everything from that part to everything that we've just discussed, which is, quite abrasive emails, shutdowns. A big key one is non-responsiveness, 1-word answers. That is just painful to get that sort of stuff. But if we can talk about, next part of that question was, well, what did you do about it, or how did you approach it? There's a couple of things, and I've got them memorized because I just do this in my head. And it takes a bit of time to sort of get that skill to the first one, which is just stay calm. There's nothing worse than working yourself up mentally, right? And you're actually off the ball then of what the actual objective is and what the problem is, or what is even going on. Stay calm, deep breath, right? Call out that you recognize there's an issue by validating, like there's that you sense a tone or the frustration or body language, whatever it may be. Just call it out. I can see that you seem a little bit frustrated, right? Ask them why they see there is an issue or being a problem. Like, what is it? Then the biggest and most important steps are actively listen. Don't just try to hear them out and one-up them. Actively listen to their problem. Then the biggest part of that is repeat the concerns. So they know that you're on the same page, you're actively sympathizing, and this often helps, and you'll find, diffuse whatever is going on at the moment. This problem still exists, don't get me wrong, but the tonality, the frustration is often diffused around about this point, right? Only if you believe that you or your company is actually at fault with whatever's just occurred, you can apologize. If you're not, you do not, because you've done nothing wrong, right? And then you say something along the lines of, I actively want to work together to find a solution that fits here on out, right? Given the feedback you've just given me, let's actively work together to find a solution. And then you find that solution, right? That fits that fault or the requirement to get that done. And I find that those steps in that order in some sort of way always helps get the train back on the track, if that makes sense. And back to an earlier point that you made, you get across personalities that you don't gel with, whatever, that goes out the door because you're both here to work and you're both here to find a solution for the client. You're not there to make friends.
I was just thinking about that, and that's a really interesting kind of, not peer-to-peer conversation, but maybe the dynamic in that conversation is media salesperson talking with media buyer. What about the other end, right? And this is, I actually had a young guy reach out to me the other day who's a sales coordinator looking to transition into media sales.
Sure.
Who listens to the pod. So let's think about this in terms of maybe something a bit more tactical. So, this poor guy, and he's not, but let's put this scenario out there. This poor guy's sitting there. He's got a client that's consistently delivering their material, their artwork, their approvals, last thing on a Friday afternoon. It's requiring multiple people to stay back late. It's one that we've probably all experienced, a client who just doesn't maybe respect or adhere deadlines. So let's unpack this one. How, as maybe a media salesperson, so not someone escalating it to a manager, a media salesperson, how might they seek to kind of identify, diagnose, and then obviously resolve that type of issue?
Yeah, okay. I think there's a couple of key words there, well, one at least, and that is consistent lateness. I mean, that's just not cool, right? Because the pressure it puts on everybody. So I think the number one call out, which I'm assuming this gentleman's already done, but I'm going to call it out. Have they been delivered clear deadlines of when material is required? So I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I need to say that to be clear. From that point, there is a conversation that's required, right? Now, generally from his level to his counterpart at the other end, I'm going to assume that they're stuck because the client is delivering it late as well, right? So there's not really a point of escalation in that conversation. It is obviously having that conversation with the individual. Listen, the deadline's actually Thursday, for argument's sake. This is the third week in a row I've had it on Friday. It's putting a lot of pressure on our teams to get this up and running. And, it's one of those things where you start, depending on how the conversation flows, it's starting to put pressure on our teams. We want to be able to deliver the best possible outcome for your campaign. I'm being restricted if we're consistently getting this late material, right? It's harboring our capability, and I want to make sure that we deliver the best possible campaign. That's about the extent that individual can do, right? But he has to have the conversation. He has to make sure all his ducks are in a row in terms of he's delivered the right client deadlines and whatnot. From that point, if he doesn't get a resolution from that, there has to be a point of escalation, Jamie. And I know you're saying it's peer-to-peer and you want to have a chat with there. There's only so much he's going to be able to do. But this is why you have managers, and this is why you have the people that you reporting to, because they have those counterparts that they deal with on the other side of the fence. So if that doesn't get resolved, it now then goes into the manager's hands. And we've all been there, mate, and you've had these conversations. I've definitely had these conversations. It has to be dealt with because it's not just about the deadline. It's also on how your staff and team and group perceive you for standing up for them as well. Because this is now multiple times. This isn't a one-off, because a one-off you can live with. So from that point in time, that is that individual reaching out to his counterpart at the other end. Oh, but the client only delivers it at this time. But okay, can I then speak to the client? Right? Because we want to deliver the best and optimal campaign for you, but with these consistent delays, this makes it hard and tough to do our job. You're going to have to do a post-analysis, and I do not want to throw in there that your material was late. And I know that's a bit of a harsher conversation that he can't have, but that is where that escalation starts to go. One of the biggest things you get shot with, which I have, and I'm sure you have as well, but your competitor does it.
Oh, yeah, that old chestnut.
Yeah, but your competitor does it. Okay. So then as a business, you need to make a decision on, do we value this business? Because that is a traded piece of business. That is not a partnership. Because a partnership and someone that supports your business wouldn't put you in this position. It's
funny, that your competitor can do this one. It's a funny one to be in, particularly I think in the channel that I'm now in of out of home, because, it is a really complex, surprisingly, or not surprisingly probably to most, but there's a lot of complexity in the back end of how a business runs. Like, it's a logistics business, it's a property business, it's a media sales business, as well as owned assets, as well as tenders. There's a lot of different commercial pressure. There's a lot of stakeholders, and businesses, just by virtue of the fact that they're structured differently, have different protocol, have different processes. So I often kind of tackle that conversation. I hate to say it, but I tackle that one head on too. And a lot of the time what I try to unpack is, and this isn't to try to be controversial, but if you're a media buyer, particularly if you're on the investment side, your job is not to sit there and just put those kind of competitive comments out there. Your job's actually to understand how the system works and to understand how the client and the agency potentially needs to trade or operate to maximize the value for the client. So I just kind of put that back as to, it's actually really disappointing when that gets thrown our way. And to your point, it really doesn't speak in the spirit of partnership. Nobody appreciates hearing that. So mate, it's a good one to kind of to park that on, because I think I wanted to ask you about this one. This one's interesting, right? Interpersonal relationships. So part of our job as media salespeople, media sales professionals, it's to foster and grow strong working relationships. It's to build rapport. It's to somewhat socialize and create that level of comfortability when we are transacting together a lot. Can a relationship come a little bit too close? Can the lines get blurred? And what are some of those issues that might actually stem from that?
Yeah, mate, absolutely. It's a massive, strong issue because you might end up settling down and having two beautiful daughters with them. And I can't get out of that one. And she's definitely using that relationship to her advantage. No, mate.
And I say this with a wife who works in an advertising agency.
Yeah, exactly. It is a very small industry, mate. Our job is to nurture, form, and utilize relationships. Period. Right? Can it get too far or you be pushed? Yes, you can. But then I'd say to you that wasn't a true relationship to begin with, because I'm going to go back to my other comment. A true relationship and a true partnership, someone would not put you in a compromising position, nor should you them. So you need to work out what your actual, and everyone would be doing this in terms of their client contacts, and whether you use Salesforce or not, or PowerPoint, it doesn't really matter, but utilizing people that you want to get close to, or people that you know that are your strong relationships. But you also need to work through, it's not just you delivering on that, it's what are they doing for you? It's absolutely a two-way street. And when you can identify that this individual, it's not about just giving you business, but it could be giving you intel, or giving you the inside running, or giving you a beautiful brief that explains everything, things like that. That I'd say is a two-way relationship, because you want to do things for that individual. You want to do things for that partnership. But if you're finding that someone is just driving you and wanting, what are the most common things, Jamie? We're talking junkets, tickets, send my kids to school. I don't know what it is. Whatever it may be, it's just a one-way relationship. That is not a relationship that you necessarily want to foster, right? So you got to make sure that you're not being utilized or used in that sense, but it's a two-way street. Then it's going to come to a point where there are times, mate, where people are going to ask you favors. And you as an individual are going to have to make that decision as, is this a favour that you want to deliver on? What is the greater outcome? Because at the end, it's not just about that individual and you, it's about the business. And it is about, is this a good outcome for the business? And you need to have that lens all the time. As close as you get to a friendship, a partnership, a client or whatever, the long-term goal is, or the long-term lens really needs to be, if I make this decision or do this favor or whatever it may be, does this benefit this business in the long run? And that is the lens that I use always.
That's the lens you got to use. Yeah.
It's the lens you got to use. And if it does not, which it doesn't sometimes, and that favor that gets asked, I have to say no. And I do. And you do have to as well, right? And that individual, if that relationship is solid, will understand and respect it. You can give them detail as to why you cannot, so they understand some context, right? And you move on from that and you just do the next one.
The filter I've always tried to use, and this is a real simple framework that I think most people can really lean on. Your job a lot of the time, particularly in a market or in a trading environment like right now, where there is some downward pressure on things like engagement budgets and all that kind of stuff. Your job fundamentally is to put time, people, and money into the areas that are going to generate the most return for the business. And if you are, furnishing a client with things like client entertainment opportunities and lunches and tickets and junkets and all that stuff, you have to have it be a defendable position back to the business, right?
Correct.
As if you can sit there and say confidently they're a key partner, it's a strategic relationship that's long-term. This is about investing in the relationship and providing an opportunity for us to build trust and to build rapport and to meet the wider team and to have more connections into the business. I'm going to sign that expense claim off every day, right? But if you can't justify it in a manner that actually has the common sense filter, and it does feel like it is a disproportionate level of value being delivered one way or the other. I'm going to call that out, right? And I think that's sometimes a difficult area, because I think relationship can kind of be seen as it's a very kind of subjective thing when we say relationship. Look, we can't do that, it'll burn the relationship. We can't say that to them, it'll burn the relationship. It's like, I don't know, I think you actually build credibility and reputation, and you forge trust by also standing your ground at times, and by the way that you choose to have difficult conversations and the way that you choose to air issues. That's actually what builds a relationship.
Yeah, and I think the term difficult conversation or a hard chat or it has such negative connotations. It does.
Yeah.
And it just shouldn't. I can categorically tell you that a lot of my really strong relationships started off from a conflict, right? Yeah. And not, doesn't have to be a massive conflict, but it started off from a disagreement, or we didn't see eye to eye on certain things. But the fact that we're able to work through it only strengthens that resolve and shows that they're capable of coming to a solution. I'm capable of coming to a solution. Therefore, we can work together. So whether or not we get along or not is totally irrelevant. So I get when, people say, oh, I don't like that person, he's these. It's got nothing to do with it. It literally has nothing to do with it. Right. And of course, there are those smaller examples where some people are just ridiculous and they act just abhorrently, and you need to ladder that up. You need to raise that up. Because I can tell you that businesses wouldn't want those people within their business anyway. Right. So they need to be identified and worked with and dealt with. Right. But at the end of the day, everyone wants an outcome. It's just a matter of working through the how. So what is the best pathway to that? One of the things you just mentioned there, so it sort of just struck me then, mate, was, signing expense forms and are they a relationship and other. The easiest way I found in my experience to do this is everyone does business plans, whether they're yearly, quarterly, half yearly, whatever. There's business plans. There's clients that are listed on there. There'll also be clients that maybe have $0 against it, because they are not on your roster yet, but you want them to be. It's about identifying them early, highlighting them, making sure your sales director or your manager, whoever it is that you're reporting into, is very clear that if we do X, Y, and Z, and I host them here, or I take them there, or we present them proactively with this and this is going to be the outcome and solution, right? So it's not just who's this now and where did this one come from? If you're very clear internally that this is your path and goal and plan, I find that it's so much easier, one, internally, but two, your mindset is very stern and you know exactly that that's the one you're going for and that's what you're going to do. And it could be multiple, but more specifically one.
Mate, I love that. I want to jump into the listener question now, because I think this is a good theme to keep going on.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
Hey Jamie, I run a sales team and I need to address the way a particular agency communicates with my team. They are extremely aggressive in their communication, both via phone and email. They refuse to accept accountability for any issues they create and threaten to award business to competitors anytime we don't bend to their will. They are one of the largest agencies in the market, so we need to work with them, but I also can't have my team being treated this way. How do I fix this?
Yeah, wow, that sounds like a shit show.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. So, it's not uncommon, unfortunately. I think, sporadically over the years, you tend to come across some type of situations that involves a team or a group of people that, sort of, I guess, act like this. And I don't want to get into, where it stems from and all that sort of stuff. But the question is, how do I fix it, right?
Yep.
I think you mentioned one of the key things is the largest agency in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I just pulled out straight away, because that is, I'd use that to your advantage first and foremost. So clearly the manager or whoever it is that is a senior individual within your office needs to have a conversation with the head of the group or the head of the agency, or whoever it may be in terms of that situation. Because the key thing I pulled out is one of the largest agencies in the market. They're very protective on how the market sees them. Right? If they're the largest agency,
they need to have a good reputation in order to win business. It's a big thing that gets pulled up, especially in this country anyway, and you know, in what we do, where we have media and whatever here, it's worn like a bit of a badge, right? So you know that they take pride in how the market sees them and how the market views them. So I'll be using this to your advantage. I'm assuming the behaviour will not be centred around senior management, because I don't believe anyone acts like that. So like all things, getting some time, preferably face to face with whoever the manager is, and sitting down and humbly sort of going through the examples. You will have, and sorry, I'm jumping here because I'm going to assume that they've tried to deal with this situation and it's escalated to a point that it's just huge now, right? So you are escalating it up. So you'll have everything printed or kept in terms of past communication, how you've been dealt with, all that sort of stuff. You're not pulling that out just yet. You're having that conversation with the manager of, and the key way to approach it is going to be, my team is trying to work with your team. I'm really struggling as to how the best to go about this and how the best to conduct this, because it seems that whatever we do, it just doesn't seem right. So I really would love your help in helping me navigate, you know, our communication and ways to work. I think people, you know, generally call it ways to work together. The individual, you know, the other counterpart will probably say, what do you mean? So look, you know, these are the briefs we receive. This is the responses we receive. This is the feedback we get, which is, you know, if you don't do what we say, then you're not getting the business, right? Which is not in the client's best interest, because you can go down the line of specific examples of our audience is their audience and blah, blah, blah. You can go through all that sort of stuff. But anyone that sees that type of correspondence of their team, I know if I saw that, I would be absolutely horrified and mortified, right? You're trying to come to a resolution together, not to embarrass anyone, but to ensure that their communication and their tonality starts to change and giving you a fair opportunity to be able to deliver and do business. One of the things here that you kind of mentioned was if you just don't do what we say, we'll award the business elsewhere. That is a massive issue, because that is something that I've heard quite commonly, but not necessarily in my medium, but in other mediums. And that is a hard one that needs to be raised, because it's about what's best for the client and the best outcome. Now, if your competitors within your subset of medium are driving that market down and going to that point, that's your business decision that you've got to make. Because if that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing. And if your audience is similar, I don't think you have an answer for that, Jamie, to be honest. Because if that's where they're going, that's where they're going. But everything else in terms of treatment, communication, it has to be pulled up, and it has to be pulled up rather urgently, to be honest, because again, behaviour walk past, behaviour accept. It'll be just a cyclical thing that people will accept that is okay to do.
I was reflecting on this myself, and I agree with everything you've just said there. And it's not like I haven't had to deal with these situations, but it's hard without the full context. And I think I just wonder, and I'm certainly not suggesting this is the issue, and I certainly probably want to talk more to this person, but I do wonder if this relationship has become a bit terminal over time, and there is actually a bit of, I'm not going to say hypersensitivity, but maybe some of this communication and behaviour is being misinterpreted as more hostile than maybe it actually is.
We don't have a lot of context from, you know, obviously we don't have history, we don't know what's happened here, but to the point that we were talking about earlier, tonality over email is so hard to read. It is so hard to read. And if this wasn't quelled earlier on, in terms of even if it was a face-to-face contact where people were mistreated or whatever, and it wasn't dealt with then, it's given a pass and it's gone through. And if someone has consistently been spoken to like this, you're right. It's like anything there now that is said, they could be offended by, right? So there's a lot that can be read into this.
I feel for this person because I think, you know, it's clearly not a desirable situation to be in. But I think exactly what you just said then, mate, was the textbook best practice way to go and address that situation. And it's probably how we wrap this one up, mate. Thank you, mate. Like, really good chat. Obviously a bit of an interesting subject matter to get into. One thing I wanted to know, obviously, was if there's sort of maybe like a parting thought you had on this sort of topic just to wrap the whole thing up. And the other thing I wanted to know is can people connect with you on LinkedIn and chat a bit more about this, mate?
Mate, I mean, final thoughts. I think as we're going through the conversation, I've sort of changed maybe what I had in mind. But I think the biggest thing is don't be afraid to communicate and don't be afraid to have the conversation. I'm not going to say tough, I'm going to say hard, but I say conversation because it's going to save you so much time in the long run. You know, again, a lot of my best relationships have stemmed from again, it wasn't necessarily conflict. It was just that I could sense that we weren't seeing eye to eye, but calling it out. I think calling it out, and again, calling it out sometimes has a negative connotation, but it's just calling out, look, I acknowledge, I can see that there's something not sitting right. What is it? How do we fix it? I can see by your email that you seem a little bit frustrated. Is there something going on previously? What's happened? And just trying to get on that front foot first and setting that path right. I think course correction is a big one. Is if you feel that this is not on track, correct that course straight away, that second, that day, that minute. Don't wait, because as we can tell, it starts to just fester, and then it just moves into this comedy of errors where wrong briefs come through, wrong feedback comes through, it's incorrect, finger point, it just goes out of whack, right? So you just call it out.
I love that. Well, hey, mate, always a pleasure talking to you, my man. I'm going to put your LinkedIn and your bio in the show notes, and I'd love to have you back on in future to talk about this maybe more if we get some feedback, or even to tackle another topic. Nisar, thanks, man. Great to have you on.
It's post a bit of COVID with travel, and I'll sit next to you, buddy.
Can't wait, man. Thanks for that.
You've been listening to Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. Head to MediaSalesMastery.com to help pick the topic, guide the show, and don't forget to subscribe to receive new episodes each week.